Welcome to the One-Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. 2 Nephi, Chapter 3. Chapter Overview. Lehi turns his attention to his son Joseph and encourages him and prophesies about him and his descendants. Before I get into the meat of this discussion, I just have to include this meme that I made based on this chapter. Yep, and it was fully justified because the phrase fruit of thy loins, or fruit of his loins, or fruit of my loins occurs some 19 times in this one chapter that has only 25 verses. Contrast that to a total of one time the phrase occurs in the King James Bible in Acts 2:30. Although loins is used about 60 times in the entire Bible, although probably only about half of those times, or even less, is it used to speak of parentage. For instance, there are a great many times when it talks about putting sackcloth on your loins and things like that. I don't know whether to give Joseph Smith marks for consistency or to lower his grade for being repetitious and super boring. Anyway, on to the discussion. 2 Nephi 3 has several what I call soft discrepancies with the Bible. They don't necessarily outright contradict the Bible. The Mormon could claim that it's not a contradiction at all, just that they weren't included in the Bible for some reason. However, Christians will recognize them as conspicuous by their absence from the Bible. First, in verse 5 and following, Lehi claims that Joseph in the Bible received a vision in which he, quote, truly saw our day, and that he got a promise from God that one of his descendants would raise up a righteous branch unto the house of Israel. This is, of course, poppycock. There is absolutely zero evidence of it outside of the Book of Mormon and unverified Mormon assertions. This branch seems to be the Book of Mormon peoples in the days of Lehi and Nephi, but the rest of the chapter seems to focus on Joseph Smith as if he is the one under consideration. Truly, Joseph Smith needed an editor to clear up these problems and discrepancies. After all, if Lehi is talking about his day, as the first phrase of verse 5 says, then why does Lehi substantiate and bolster his claim of this prophecy by jumping forward over 2,000 years from his time in the 500s BC to Joseph Smith in the 1800s AD? Verses 6 through 14 could be speaking of either Lehi's son Joseph in the Book of Mormon or some unnamed prophet who just happens to be descended from the biblical Joseph. And based on Lehi speaking of our day, that would almost necessitate that. But then, verse 15 identifies this prophet or seer, the same one as in verse 5 and all throughout, as Joseph Smith. That is, one who would be called after the name of the biblical Joseph, as well as having the same name of his own father. The Joseph Smith who wrote the Book of Mormon was Joseph Smith Jr. His father, of course, would then be Joseph Smith Sr. So it really doesn't make any sense for Lehi to be speaking of, quote, our day, that is his day, in the 500s BC, and then fast forward some 2,400 years. No sense at all. A further oddity is in verse 9, in which the biblical Joseph, living hundreds of years before Moses, identifies this prophet or seer as someone who, quote, shall be great like unto Moses. Moses was identified by name at the time of Joseph? I don't think so. Again, I can just hear the internal dialogue of Joseph Smith at this point. Oh crap, I just said that Joseph got a revelation that I would be another Moses, when the first Moses hasn't even been born yet. Oh, I know. I'll just say that Joseph got a revelation of that too. Verse 14 contains a verifiable false prophecy, and one that I haven't seen used much, if at all, against Mormons, and that is that the biblical Joseph is here said to prophesy about Joseph Smith the seer, and says, they that seek to destroy him, this seer, that is Joseph Smith Jr., shall be confounded. Well, Joseph Smith was killed while trying to escape from jail. So much for confounding those that seek to destroy him. Verse 15 contains another false prophecy, though the Mormon would assert that this has just merely not yet been fulfilled, namely that Joseph Smith would bring Lehi's people, that is the American Indians, unto salvation. The Native Americans, like everybody else, have largely rejected the Book of Mormon, so that prophecy went unfulfilled too. Verse 18 is odd, weird, and convoluted, and hard to make heads or tails of it. Quote, And the Lord said unto me also, I will raise up unto the fruit of thy loins, and I will make for him, that is Moses, a spokesman. And I, behold, I will give unto him that he shall write the writing of the fruit of thy loins unto the fruit of thy loins, and the spokesman of thy loins shall declare it. See why I put the meme at the beginning? Okay, back to the verse. According to the Bible, Moses' spokesman was his brother Aaron, a descendant of Levi, not Joseph. So who is the supposed spokesman who would write for Moses? Was it even supposed to have been in the time of Moses, or are we talking about some other time? Perhaps the Book of Mormon peoples and their writings in the 500s BC, or even later. I don't know. Verse 24 seems to repeat the claim of verse 5, namely that someone would be raised up to restore the house of Israel. But if this person is Joseph Smith Jr., then that would require that he be a descendant of the Book of Mormon peoples, that is, a descendant of the American Indians, which makes no sense because, as far as I know, he never claimed American Indian ancestry. I know that Joseph Smith did claim descent from Abraham, at least eventually, but there is no actual evidence for it, except for his unsubstantiated claim. That is, there is no genetic testing that has been done, nor is there any Smith family history of their descent from Jewish peoples at all. It has as much historic evidence as Harry Potter being real.